All right, so how do we summarize this question? That there can be certain scenarios where the transaction can be of non-routine nature, or it may involve significant judgments, while entities preparing those financial statements. And there can be a cases of complex transaction. There can be a case where entities doing the transaction with the related party. There can be changes in the regulatory requirement, economic accounting standard. There can be risk of fraud. All this risk, please, as an auditor, we have to give a special consideration to it, right? Why they are saying that? There is another question related to it which says risk of material misstatement may be greater for significant non-routine transaction arising from matters such as complex calculation. Okay. Also, the risk of material misstatement can be greater for significant judgmental matters that require development of accounting estimate. Explain from matters such as accounting principles for accounting estimate may be subjected to differing interpretation, etc. Explain in detail. So they have picked one topic, like out of all, they have picked the topic that wherever there is a application of accounting principle, accounting matter, it is subjected to difference in interpretations. Why? The risk of material misstatement may be greater for the significant non-routine transaction arising from matters such as following. First, wherever there is a greater management interpretation in specifying the accounting treatment. The management has to decide what call they should be taking, how they should be recognizing that particular income, how should be showing that balance sheet item, or wherever there is a greater intervention for the data collection and processing by, that needs to be done manually. See, if it is a normal transaction, there will be a coding system through which the transaction will be placed into the accounting software. It will be processed and in the balance sheet. But before making the balance sheet or the financial statement, suppose there is so much of data collection is involved, there is so much of calculation is involved, then in that case you might say, no, 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 this is the place where it is a non-routine thing is happening and there is a manual intervention involved. The complex calculation or the accounting principles and the nature of non-routine transaction which may make it difficult for the entity to implement the effective controls over the risk. And the risk can be of the greater for the significant judgmental matters, and the risk of material misstatement may be greater for the significant judgmental matters that require development of accounting estimate arising from such matters, such as the accounting principles or the matters which are subjective or complex. Now the question is, how do you remember this question and how do you segregate this question from the top question? So the first question, so this answer that you have studied just now, this answer is actually a discussion of question 6. Under question 6, there is a separate question called as factors to be considered by the auditor in exercising the judgment as to which risk are significant risk. Did you get both these topics in your books, guys? Will you be able to identify whether they have asked the factors or they have asked you to explain this concept itself?
Yes, ma'am.
Priya, you too? By the way, Amrita has joined kya? Amrita, can you please keep your camera on, dear?
Yes, ma'am.
Why didn't you do it till now? I thought you had not joined
Sorry.
only.
No, no, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, cool, cool. So we just started with chapter 3. Chapter 3 is thoda complex. Like I just took some advice from Priya and Pooja, how do we start the session? So because we know that exam is coming up in few days, right?
Yes.
So rather than doing all the basic standards and everything, why don't we handle the problem first? So both of
Okay.
them said that chapter 3 is thoda complicated for them. Do you also feel the same way, or are you comfortable in chapter 3?
No, it's a bit difficult for me
Difficult,
also.
yeah. So we are
Yeah.
taking that particular topic so that we can learn, we can memorize those points.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to give you 2 minutes. Please, both for question 6 and question 7, please learn these points. Either you do it from the books or you would want to do it from the screen. But when it comes to the factor, what point are you going to write? At least 4 points in the factors or 4 points in the explaining that risk is greater in the non-routine transaction.
Okay.
Cool. Shall we move ahead, guys?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Come to essay 315. All right. Now I want you to pay some special attention to SA 315. What is the full name of SA 315? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. Right? You are trying to identify and assess the risk through understanding the entity and its environment. Under that, you have a topic of objective of an auditor. Every standard has objective of an auditor, right? Then you are also explained over here the meaning of misstatement and the example of his. Then you are also made understand the risk assessment process and risk assessment procedure. There is a difference between the procedure and the process, right? Under this, you in SA 315 itself, you have a topic of understanding the entity and its environment. How do you understand the entity? There are certain points, factors related to it. Then there is a risk that require special audit consideration. Two questions of this you have already done, right? The greater significant judgmental non-routine transaction. Then after this you have a topic of internal control. But before we go to the topic of internal control, we have to be clear with the concept of objective of an auditor as per SA 315, then the risk assessment process, risk assessment procedure. Along with that, understanding the entity and its environment. Cool. Amrita, can you please read question number 9?
The auditor shall identify and assess the risk of material misstatement at both levels to provide a basis for designing and performing further audit procedures. For the purpose of identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement, the auditor shall identify a risk, assess the identified risk, relate the identified risk, and consider the likelihood of misstatement. Explained above in detail.
Now, can you identify, based on your content on your book, all three of you, can you try to identify from which topic they have asked this question? In SA 315 itself?
Objectives.
No. Now, I'll teach you two things today. You were saying something, Amrita?
No, no.
Okay. So under SA 315, most of the students make this mistakes. इसलिए I'm highlighting. Under SA 315, there is a topic of risk assessment process. And there is another topic of risk assessment procedure. Now I'll take you to that topic and then I'll tell you how I say make question. Why? See, the answer of these chapters are very easy. It just the way they make the questions, becomes complicated because we sometimes when we read, we don't read from that point what question can be asked. Now just remember few words I am highlighting over here. One, you have to identify the risk, consider the likelihood of that misstatement. You have to, sorry, identify the risk, assess the identified risk, relate to the identified risk, and consider the likelihood of misstatement. Just remember these 4 points and now come to your books. And under SA 315, you come to this topic called as risk assessment process. In the beginning of SA 315, you will find this topic of SA 315, a risk assessment process. Did you find it? Amrita, Priya, Milana, got it, right? Not the procedure. I am talking about the process. Amrita, you got it? Can somebody tell her the page number if you have the study mat?
Page 3.12.
Amrita, you're studying from a study mat only, no? Okay. Go to page number 3.12.
Yeah, that's risk assessment procedures.
Risk assessment process. Process you need.
1.6, para 1.6. And the second point, for the purpose of
Okay.
identifying.
Now,
Yeah.
Yeah.
for the purpose of identifying the risk and assessing the risk of material misstatement, this is a four-step process. Step one, you have to identify the risk. Step two, you have to assess the identified risk. Step three, you have to relate those risks. And then you have to consider the likelihood of that misstatement. So first step, we will identify the risk. Now, I'll make you write this answer, but I just wanted to highlight that this question is different than risk assessment procedure. So what does risk assessment procedure include? Risk assessment procedure has three components. Component one, you do the inquiry. Component two, you do the analytical procedure. Component three, you do the observation and inspection. And that is where from now onwards, you will not make the mistake, right? Just remember what question is asked. Now, let's explain what is identifying the risk and assessing the risk and relating to the risk means and also considering the likelihood of it. For as per SA 315, for the purpose of identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement, the auditor shall. There will be a lot of temptation for you to write this as a shortcut over here, right? When you're writing. But please don't, you do it now, but please don't do that in the examination. Because of lack of time, I'm also writing that way, but it is not acceptable in the exams, always. Right? First step, identify risk throughout the process. Identify the risk throughout the process of obtaining an understanding of the entity and its environment, including relevant internal control. Now I'll highlight few words. First, you have to do it throughout the process. What do? You will understand the entity, you will understand its environment, you will understand its internal control. This is the name of a standard itself, right? So once you know the is name of the standard, you will be right. You will be able to write step one. By considering the class of transaction slash account balance slash disclosures, right? Step two is now because you have identified the risk, you will assess, evaluate the risk identified. What does it mean? Whether these identified risk relate more pervasively to the financial statement as a whole and affects multiple assertion. What is the meaning of point two? If you get to know, I'll give you a scenario. You are at your client place and you are just trying to identify, do the audit of the information system. You are just checking the back coding of the how rates are calculated, GST are calculated for all the sales transaction, how input tax credit is calculated, everything. And you found a coding error in which instead of calculating GST at 5%, the client system is calculating GST at 12%. Now, this is the risk you have identified. After identifying the risk, try to assess whether it is applicable pervasively to the entire. Pervasively means applicable to all. So whether it is pervasively affecting the multiple assertions or it is affecting the entire financial statement as a whole. Because the moment you say, "Arey, because of this, all the financial, all the sales transaction itself is calculated correctly, that means entire revenue is wrong." So this becomes a significant risk. Clear, Priya? Everyone? Step 3. Now relate the identified risk to what can go wrong. Take into account relevant controls and auditors' intention to test it. What can go wrong? So, for example, now that you know that the GST is calculated at the rate of 10%, at the rate of 12% instead of 5%, now try to assess the output GST liability is going to be incorrect. The amount charged to the customer is going to be incorrect. So there are multiple assertion that is getting affected because of this. So try to find out what else can go wrong because of this identified risk. And you also have to consider the relevant controls related to it and your intention to test all those controls. I don't have the space to write, step 4 in the same question, but I'll write it here. It's step 4. Consider the likelihood of misstatement, including possibility of misstatement, whether its magnitude could result in multiple misstatement. Now, can you tell me the difference between a identified risk and misstatement? What is the risk and what is a misstatement? When you identified a coding problem that instead of 5% GST rate, GST in the coding it shows the GST rate as 12%. Now this is a risk that the output GST liability is calculated incorrectly. Yes. When you discuss this with your client told, no, we know that this is a coding problem. We tried to correct it later on. But every time our accounting team, our accounting guy was advised or like instructed, every time you raise an invoice, you have to manually correct this rate from 12% to 5%. So do you think that the risk converted into the misstatement? Because the accounting guy was looking into each and every invoice and he was correcting it. So because he was correcting it before raising the invoice, there was no misstatement only, no. All the invoices were raised at the correct amount. So not every risk will convert into misstatement because in between the entity will put some control. Yes? So you all, that is point 4. So now you, because you have identified risk, that doesn't mean that there is a misstatement only. So consider the likelihood of that misstatement, chances of that misstatement, possibility of misstatement, and also whether the magnitude of that misstatement, whether it can become a material misstatement. Sorry, not could result in a, this word, last word is actually, I'll just correct it. It is material misstatement. So like it shouldn't be like it is a small error and you are like, just uh, telling the client, no, you have to correct it, then this and that, otherwise I'll not issue the audit report. You have to make sure that error is significant enough so that you can apply the audit procedures on it, right? So these are the 4 steps of risk assessment process. Can you please quickly revise this so that you don't have to spend the time later on? Along with the keywords, please learn these points. You all were writing this as in form of answer. Now you are not just reading this, right? Amrita, you also, right? You wrote this answer? Good. So even though it is there in your books, but try writing it. Writing helps memorizing the concept for a long time, right? Perfectly. Please remember, learn this. I'll pause the recording for 2 minutes.
Yes.
Now let's come to the next question, that is your risk assessment procedure. And it's also a good question, I'll tell you. So risk assessment procedure has 3 components. Procedure always talks about technique. Remember, the process is always about there is some step, there is some activity going on. Procedure is mainly talking about the actual technique of performing that particular process. So for doing the risk assessment process, you need certain techniques. What technique you will need? You will need inquiry, you will need analytical procedure, and you will need to do the observation and inspection. The point here is with whom you will do the inquiry. So you can do the inquiry with the management and others within the entity. You always have this beautiful question in your exam. I think the last this question was asked in May 24. After that, I don't think this question is asked, but there is a question that obviously you will do the inquiry with the management. Whom will you speak when you go to a client place? Like to whom will you talk to? You will talk to management and the CEO or the CFO of that company, right? But not necessarily you will restrict your conversation to this management and TCWG, right? Priya, Pooja, you will also talk to the other people within the entity. The point is, what other people and what will you discuss with them? So there is a question in your books. I'll first read that question, then I'll come back to this topic, right? Much of the information obtained by auditors' inquiries is obtained from the management and those responsible for financial reporting. However, the auditor may also obtain information or a different perspective in identifying risk of material misstatement through inquiries with others within the entity and other employees with different level of authority. Explain with the help of examples. So you have to explain like to whom, what are those other people, who are those other people with whom you will seek inquiry, you will ask questions about to identify the risk of material misstatement. Did you get this question? Right? Very like often they ask this question. So in other people, we have legal counsel, legal department people of that entity. What will you talk to the legal department people? You will talk to them about any ongoing litigation, whether company is complying with the laws or not. Are there any non-compliances matter? Then you will talk to the marketing and sales people. You will talk about the marketing strategies. You will talk about the sales trend. You will talk about the important customers, important contracts with the customer. You will talk to the IT personnel, IT information technology people. What will you talk about with them? You will talk, are there any changes into the system which you are auditing? Are there any control failures, system related control failures, or any other information that you may need which may be related to the risk? Do you see these points in your books, guys? Then you will talk to the risk management committee. This risk management committee is actually responsible for governing the risk, operational risk, regulatory risk, right? So any risk that may affect the financial reporting, such as the operational and regulatory risk, you will inquire about these risks with the RMC risk management committee. Then you will also do the inquiry to internal auditors. What will you ask the internal auditor? Did they perform the internal audit? What was the procedure? How effective did they find the internal controls of the entity? Then you will talk to other employees. Who other employees? The employees who are involved in the complex and the unusual transaction initiations and the processing. Right? So please give the reference of question number 11, and then you have to write this answer. You just line first line of the first line of this question itself is enough. Much of the information is obtained by the auditor's inquiry from the management. However, auditor may also obtain information from others within the entity, under which you write in short sentence. You don't need such huge sentences with like ICI, but you need to write only this portion. Pooja and Amrita, both of you at least do the scribbling of these points, no?
Yes,
Around
ma'am.
in your book itself, do the scribbling.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Acha, you did, yeah? Okay, cool. Now, there can be another question related to the risk assessment procedure. I don't have that question in my question book, but I'm writing this down. So for risk assessment procedure, how an auditor can use the analytical procedure, right? Analytical procedure, how do you use as a risk assessment procedure? So if you have studied, like, if you have gone through SA 520 once, even once, you will understand under analytical procedure, what do? You see the relationship of financial and non-financial information. You see the relationship of financial and non-financial information as part of SA 520 analytical procedure. Why do you do that? To identify any unusual relationship or transaction that you are not aware of, right? So analytical procedure help you identify the unusual relationship and transaction that the auditor is not aware of by applying the other audit procedures. Done. So how do you explain this analytical procedure as our risk assessment procedure? Analytical procedure as a risk assessment procedure. It helps identify aspect of the entity that auditor was unaware of. It helps identify the aspect of entity that auditor was unaware of. For example, for example, you calculate the current ratio or you calculate the debt equity ratio. Now, normally in audit, nobody is asking you to calculate any debt equity ratio, working capital ratio, data turnover ratio, right? Normally you won't do. But SA 520 tells you that, dude, you have to do it. Because sometimes just by looking at the financial statement, you will not see any problem in that number. But when you relate that balance sheet numbers with the P&L items or other non-financial items, sometimes you will get to see something unusual. Some aspect of that entity that you are not aware of. So that is the reason you should apply analytical procedure. In the second point, you will write, it includes analysis of both financial and non-financial information. Why? It helps identify existence of unusual transactions or events. Which point 4 is connected to point 3 only, which may assist the auditor to identify risk of material misstatement, especially risk of fraud. There is chances that out of any three of these one component may be asked in your exam, either in MCQ or in descriptive. So please learn this point. First point is analytical procedure as a risk assessment procedure. It helps to identify the aspect of the entity which you were not aware of. Then it involves both analysis of financial and non-financial information. It will also help you identify the existence of unusual transaction or event, which may assist the auditor in identifying the risk of material misstatement, especially risk of fraud. Now comes the last component. Let me know when you are ready. Now comes the last procedure under the risk assessment procedures. That is, you can, for in order to identify and assess the risk, you may also do certain observations and inspection. What will you observe or what will you inspect? When you go to a client place, you normally observe how they are conducting the business operation, how they are storing the inventory, how their offices are placed, how they are communicating, other each of these departments are communicating to each other. Then you also inspect certain documents, records, and manuals, SOPs, standard operating procedure. So observation and inspection may support inquiries of management and others and may also provide information about the entity and its environment. There are certain examples they have given. Observation and inspection of the following, such as operations. And I try to understand by observing how business is conducted, how operations are conducted. Then inspect the documents, records, and control manual. Then also observe and inspect the reports prepared by the management. Along with that, you also have to inspect and observe the factory premises and plant facilities. It's a really small topic, only this much you have to remember. Now, there is a topic of under SA 315 itself, there is a topic of understanding the entity and its environment. Now, this topic is it's a good topic, easy topic, but you have to understand it fully, before we go to the question. That first, in understanding the entity, there are many aspects involved. Aspect one is you have to understand the relevant industry in which your client is operating. You have to understand their regulatory requirements and any other external factors, including the applicable financial reporting framework such as Ind AS, IFRS, accounting standards, IRDA requirement, Banking Regulation Act if it is a banking company. That is one aspect. Aspect two is you have to understand the nature of the entity. Did you get this topic, understanding the entity and its environment in your books, guys? Right? Then third, once you understood the nature, well, where is third? Guys, did I miss certain points in the notes?
Ma'am,
No?
third one is C, ma'am. You have written it in red ink. Accounting policies selection.
Acha, third one is accounting policies. Kya? Okay, sorry. Okay, I was like, did I miss the point chapter topic itself? Kya? Okay, so third is you have to understand the accounting policy of that entity. Then you also have to understand the objectives and the strategy of that entity. And then how entity is measuring and review the financial performance. Now, the good part is each of this question, each of this aspect have their own question. So when you say that you have to understand the regulatory or requirement or the industry requirement or the applicable AFRF, then you have to go through this. You have to understand the regulatory factors, regulatory, other requirements, other external factors in the answer. So there can be a 5 marks question just for point A, or there can be 5 marks question just for understanding the entity and its environment. Did you get this, guys? There can be two layer of questions. It can be there. One can be the top layer, that how do you understand the entity and ask matters covered into that, or each of these matters can be explained separately. Now, come to this point. Question number 14. Will you study this? Will you read this question, Pooja?
Knowledge of the client's business is one of the important principles in developing an overall audit plan. In fact, without adequate knowledge of client's business, a proper audit is not possible. As per SA 315, identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment, the auditor shall obtain an understanding of the relevant industry, regulatory, and other external factors, including the applicable financial reporting framework. Substantiate with help of examples.
Right? So now this is talking about only the point A, not the entire answer of understanding the entity and its environment, right?
Yes,
Clear?
ma'am.
So point A was industry, regulatory, and other factors, including applicable FR. All of you are writing? How do you understand our relevant industry factors? So when you want, like for example, I am into teaching industry. So if you do the audit of my particular business, then you have to understand, okay, in the teaching industry in which Madhu is operating, how that industry works. How is the growth in that particular industry? Are there any economic challenges are there industry as an industry they are facing? Right, so you have to cover, are there any technological, how much this particular industry is dependent on the IT technologies, or how much this industry is dependent on getting finances from the banks or the other, like in general aapko in you have to understand from the industry point of view. So the relevant industry factors includes industry conditions such as competitive environment, supplier and customer relationship, and technological developments. Under industry factors, you will highlight certain words. One is the competitive environment, second is supplier and customer relationship, and third, technological development. These are the examples under the relevant industry factors. Next, regulatory factors. Relevant regulatory factors. This is easy, laws and regulation, right? includes regulatory environment, comma, applicable FRF and legal and political environment. Example, regulations that affects entities operation, comma, taxation, comma, government policies or environmental requirements that may affect a company. Other than that, you also have other external factors, right? What was the third word? Word, other external factors. Under other external factors include a general economic conditions, comma, interest rates and availability of financing, comma, inflation. Economic condition, how do I identify of a company? In which economy it is operating? Like what is the interest rate? How easily it is getting the loans from the bank, or do you know what is the inflation rate in that particular country? So these are some other external factors that you have to consider about your client. Now, let's go back to that question. What have we studied? That in order to identify how do you obtain knowledge of a business as per SA 315? You first understand the relevant industry, regulatory, and other requirements, including the AFRF. Second, you have to understand the nature of entity. When you understand the nature of entity, you understand its operation, you understand its ownership, type of investment they are making, and how the entity is structured and how it is financed. Along with that, you also have to understand entity selection and application of accounting policy, and if they changed. Like for example, if I am following a method of evaluate a method of valuing my closing stock. So until the last year, I was actually using the FIFO method. This year I changed the LIFO. Then why did I change that? So you also have to understand from that business point of view whether this accounting policy is appropriate. Are they changing the accounting policy? Then whether the reason and the justification for that is there and it is appropriate. Along with that, you have to understand the objectives and the strategy of those entities, because there can be certain business risk that may also cause the risk of material misstatement in entity's financial statement. And last, you also have to see the measurement and review the entity's financial performance. Now, my question to you is, you have not even gone to the client place to do the audit. In the beginning stage itself, how do you measure that financial performance?
Prior period budgets or
You can refer to the prior period financial statement, audited financial statement. You can ask from the client, can you provide me management reports raised during the year? So the entity does not only prepare the financial statement, there can be sales analysis, there can be another, like, different purchase analysis, there can be profit analysis reports. All those reports they prepare throughout the year. Ask client to provide that. They have to provide that information. So you don't have to depend on the latest financial statement itself. You can go to prior period financial statement and you can ask the other management reports. Clear? So there can be a separate question on the nature of the entity. There can be question on the relevant industry point. If they ask you the nature of the entity for obtaining the understanding, so you say we have to understand its operation, its ownership, governance structure, type of investment they are making, and the way they are financed, and also, yeah, and how the entity is structured. Can you please quickly revise both the points so that in just 2 minutes so that we can go ahead, guys? From the topic of understanding the entity and its environment, we have the last question left of that topic, that when you are understanding the entity, including its environment and internal control, it is not like a one-time activity that you are understanding the entity only at the beginning is phase or the planning is phase, and then you will do the audit only like throughout the year, and then you will give the report. The point is, throughout the audit, you will get into you come across so many events and conditions that will raise a lot of question on the initial understanding that you got about that client, right? And that is the reason they say that obtaining an understanding of the entity and its environment is a continuous and dynamic process of gathering, updating, and analyzing the information throughout the audit. Analyze and explain, giving examples. Even though you have this in your question bank, can you please quickly write this question, because you also have to write this answer. I want you to learn and memorize these points. That understanding the entity is a continuous dynamic process of gathering, updating, and analyzing the information throughout the audit. Analyze and explain, giving examples.
Ma'am, you're on mute.
Sorry. So I was saying that why they are saying that you have to understand the entity and you gather the information throughout the audit. Now remember your chapter 7. There is a standard of SA 560, SA 570, written representation, right? Now, if you have studied like even once, you know that while you are doing SA 560, like you are actually evaluating the subsequent event. So when you evaluate, there is a subsequent event which require adjustment in the financial statement. What do? You go to client place and you talk to your management, that management, we need to adjust this event even though the audit report is prepared, or if it is yet to be issued to the public. So sometimes management says, okay, let's do that. Or sometimes management says, no, let's not do that. So whenever management refuses, that raises another question on risk of material misstatement. Sometimes it can be intentional also. Sometimes it can be related to fraud. It will raise question in your mind, no, why the management, if it is a legitimate adjustment, why management is saying no? So you can't say that you will only do the risk assessment, or you will understand the entity in the beginning. Throughout the process, it's a continuous process itself, right? So when you are assessing the risk, when you are assessing the risk of material misstatement in the financial statement, then I'm getting continuous call from a student. Just give me. Hello. Hello, कहना. Hello. I'm so sorry, dear. Huh. Assessing the risk of material misstatement of the financial statement. Also, when you have to determine the materiality in accordance with SA 320. So you can't say that I will determine the performance materiality or overall materiality in the beginning itself. Sometimes when you're performing the audit, come across certain situation which will actually raise the question whether your initial materiality was even correct, or do you need to revise the materiality. You will study this concept as part of your SA 320 as well. That you will, and sometimes there can be such situations where you will end up revising your materiality that you calculated in the beginning. Then, considering the appropriateness of selection and application of accounting policies. Not just that, for the identify areas where the special audit consideration may be necessary, for example, the related party transaction, or for developing the expectation for the use of analytical procedure, and for evaluating the sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence, such as appropriateness of assumptions and the management, oral and written representation, SA 580 as well. Right? So in all these aspects, you may end up getting, collecting the information throughout the audit when it comes to the assessing the risk of material misstatement, determining the materiality, then considering the appropriateness of selection and application of accounting policies, right? You also have to you identify the areas which require special consideration, for example, the related party transaction, appropriateness of the management going concern, then developing the expectation for use of analytical procedure, evaluating whether the audit evidence you have obtained is sufficient and or sufficient and appropriate, and also check the whether the oral or written representation that you have obtained from the management, whether it is appropriate. What do you say? How many topics have we covered so far? We have covered the audit risk. We have covered the risk that require special consideration. We have also covered the risk assessment process. We have also studied the risk assessment procedure. Then we have done the entire topic of understanding the entity and its environment, right? Now, tomorrow, I will take the entire internal control wala section, entire section, because it's a big section. So we have to, if we want to spend time on this chapter, then we have to do it correctly. Like, we will do it in a proper manner. So tomorrow we'll spend even good amount of time in internal controls. Give me some time. I will fix your morning batch. So Amrita, I was discussing with these guys. Are you here, dear?
I totally forgot. I have my yoga class from 7 to 8.
Oh, okay. You have 7 to 8 class, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, okay. Um, 7 to 8, no? I was actually considering, like, thinking if we can do the class early in the morning, because I have continuously batches. So I was, mhm. Okay, let's keep the timing as it is. Let me, like, find out if we can do something about the morning class or the early morning class, or otherwise we'll keep the time as a standard so that your study schedule don't get disturbed that way.
Yeah.
Right? All right. So tomorrow internal controls, and along with that, I will also take SA 320. So are you guys comfortable with the benchmarking and the materiality concept?
Yes.
Right, so we will be able to handle the questions directly in SA
Yes.
320, all three of you. So, like, just have a quick overview of SA 320 and internal control tomorrow if possible, so that we can jump into the questions. Like, that is, they are plain topics, but we have to remember the exact question and the answers, right? So let's do that tomorrow, at least for the internal control and SA 320. All right, see you guys tomorrow sharp at 1. What do you
Yes,
say?
ma'am.
All right, chalo. I hope
Thank
you
you,
had
ma'am.
sorry.
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome, dear. And I hope you are like, tuning up to my teaching style so far. Is it good?
Yes, ma'am. It's pretty good.
Working for you? Okay, great, great. I'll keep on asking this because this is my first complete English batch. So I also need to give the special consideration to all of you, that you should be able to understand, because, like, it's not just me teaching, it is about you also producing in the exams, right? And I'll those who have, like, I'll it will not cost much, honestly, I'll tell you. This book, if you have any printing shop which can give you the print in less than a rupee, like for per page, try to get the printout of this book. Otherwise you will always correlating, you will write somewhere else, it will not make sense to you only, like, so try it is not, I will give you the PDF of my I'm talking about this book, this writing practice book. It is already there on the drive link. I will provide you that drive link again. Just try to get a printout of it today,
Okay,
so that
ma'am.
tomorrow you're also writing in the same place. Like, see, it is like a drawing book, it is like it has a space for you to write the answer, so it will never go waste. Rather, you're utilizing, you're writing the answer in an appropriate place where you also have the question. What do you say? Works? All right, then see you guys tomorrow. Cool. Any more
Yes, ma'am.
queries? No.
No, ma'am.
All right, perfect. Chalo, bye bye, take care everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye bye.